Thank you for doing this and welcome to the conversation. Let
Thank you
me
for having me.
let me ask you by just I wanted you to talk about your background and your struggles. So people have an idea of where you were coming from before you came into my space, but mainly what you were struggling with. Because I think your story is very much about the inner struggles that had started a while back and the loop of that. So I'm going to hand it to you to just talk about your background and what struggle was, what it means to you, really.
Yes. So I think my background is a little complicated. So I'm going to do my best to untangle and sort of make it as coherent as possible.
Hmm.
So I grew up in suburban Mumbai, in that's a fairly well-to-do upper middle class family. But I think I like my personal struggles. I think what were the things that defined my journey while growing up, and quite recently, I think they played a big part in terms of who I was. So I grew up with a lot of learning disabilities. Uh, so I had dyslexia, I had untreated ADHD, and just later on, and this is something that we found out quite recently that I'm also bipolar. So, and these remained untreated for a large part of my life. So, growing up at school, in social circles, I was always seen as a destructive, mischievous, unfocused person. And at home, it was a completely different sort of view that they had of me. So, at home, I came from a house that was fairly abusive, both physically, emotionally. And, and so, while I was on one hand dealing with a lot of learning disabilities, I was also projecting and sort of being a version of myself that people thought I was. I was sort of playing a lot of different roles. And I had so many masks on, and I was pretending to be this person who I wasn't. And so within my classroom, I was seen as the bully. I was seen as a very unserious person. I was seen as the class clown. But
Right.
at the same time, I was great at sports. So I was always like paired up with my seniors in school.
Right.
And so while I was with that group, I was shy, timid, quiet, the one who was always being picked on. And so when we talk about background, I think there's this three very distinctive versions of myself. So one is the class clown, the bully. The other one is the shy and timid one, and then there is the version of me which is a abused child at home whose needs and wants were constantly not being met. Right.
Okay.
So
So how old are you right now?
I just 35.
35.
Sorry.
I was trying to get a bit of perspective of how far we are with diagnosis right now, but at the time
Yeah.
when you were younger, things like ADHD and things weren't really tested as easily. But so just to get that
Yeah.
perspective, all right.
Oh, it was a completely different time, right? So
Yeah.
I don't blame anyone, but as a
No.
child, I would always I have this very clear memory of me going to my mom and just constantly crying and being like, "There's something wrong with me. Please help me."
And I think
Yeah.
that's important to stress because I
Yeah.
think a lot of children, even now, teens
Yeah.
cannot always communicate that there is something wrong. And I think you talk about it so well because in our sessions, there's a sense of vulnerability that has come out in a way that I think is not accessible to still a lot of kids, especially from South Asian culture. I find that a lot.
I think so that a lot of that stems from the fact that you're never taught how to communicate emotion, right? Or not, you're never taught how to talk about what you want or what you need, right?
Yeah.
Your wants and needs are always thought of as being a sort of second fiddle to what you're expected to do, right? So a lot of times I feel like when people from the South Asian community try and communicate struggle, it
Yeah.
comes out as anger and frustration, right? And
Yeah.
it's very difficult to find the right words and to express the inner turmoil that's happening. And therefore, I think it becomes harder to get the right kind of help.
I think you're spot on there. I wanted to take this opportunity to actually, if you were giving any advice as a child to your mum, what would you say for a teen? Even from, if you look at the start of the struggle, it was really depression and anxiety. Then that sort of stemmed into something much bigger. And
Yeah.
a lot of the mothers who come into my space really don't know what's going on. So it's sort of the conversation needs to be led where they can have words where they can communicate with the next generation, I think. So I think it would be really helpful for advice to parents as to what to say and really do, not so much the do, but what to say when the child know you're even sensing the first stages of anxiety and depression.
So I think for me it's twofold. So the first one, and I think the most important advice that I could give parent is that sometimes you don't have to say or do anything. Sometimes you just have to be there, right? And I know it sounds very counterproductive, but most of the time your child just needs you to be present and just hold space for your child,
Yeah.
right? Because as a parent, and I think this leads into the second point, right? As a parent, your want is to always do what is right for your child and what is right by your child. But what your child needs in a moment versus what you think is the right thing can be two completely different things, right? And so the best thing that you can do for your child is to just be there and listen and be quiet, create a space that isn't judgmental,
Right.
right?
That's so important.
And exactly, right? It because I feel like the moment the child feels like they're being judged, or if there's going to be a repercussion for something that they've done or said, the tendency will always be to pull away or to hide or to lie, right? Or
Yeah.
rebel. So I think as a parent, it's almost trying to work against your nature, because you have to realize that there's two ways to go about it. You can either be the one to come up with the solution, or you can help get to a solution, right? And one has more friction than the other. And the more we can deal with the aspect of creating an environment where there is less friction, the better that is. That's the atmosphere you want to help fix it. And
Absolutely. And this is a really important factor and a lot of parents struggle with this is just being very present. And it's being very present takes work because your automatic reaction with your child is, well, something isn't right, so I need to fix it.
I need to fix it.
Right.
Exactly, right?
But what comes into the space when the parent is saying that is what does it mean, which we don't realize if I don't fix it? And that risk factor in the mind just accelerates of how is this child of mine going to cope if he doesn't do well at school or
Exactly. And I think and this from long-term perspective, because this is something that I'm having to learn now as a 35-year-old adult, is that if you grow up in an environment where everything is being fixed for you, right?
yes.
You tend to grow up to become someone who finds himself being very helpless, or is unable to fix things himself or herself without assistance, right? Or tools in a way are taken away. Problem solving tools are taken, and your coping mechanisms are taken away from you, right? So you have to, and that's a huge thing, right? Especially in the complex world that we live in today.
Absolutely.
Like your kids are going to need a whole bunch of a different tool
Resilience.
to be resilient, to problem solve. To
Yes.
it's just so much these days.
And I think and the most important lesson and really what as a parent we can teach our children is that life is not smooth. It has its ups and downs. But when it has its downs, you're quite capable of dealing with it. And what that really means is when the child comes in the space with a problem, it's holding them and letting and being there and letting them talk through their problems, being with their fears and finding that solution if the child can't do it, as a collaboration, and that's what's missing.
Exactly.
It,
Exactly. Everything has to be in collaboration with, it has to be a collaborative effort. Just because at the end of the day, even though it's a parent-child relationship, it is also a partnership, right?
it
And it is a partnership that has to be sort of guided by kindness and compassion on both ends.
absolutely. It is guided with compassion and clarity at the same time, because the parent is the adult, has to come in with the compassion and with the clarity, which really means that parents are not aware of where they're seeing from. So they really need to be doing the work so they're equipped to handle their children when they're going through these things. And I really find parents feel, actually, I'm not the one who's struggling, it's my child. So you need to fix my child. But they don't see that you are a factor in your child's safety. So if you feel safe and grounded and anchored, that's how the child is going to feel. But I think parents absolutely miss that equation, and it becomes a problem solving about the child, and they don't see their importance and their factors of their own stability and safety and trusting themselves and the child. And so that's a big factor that I think is
It's a
missing.
huge factor. A huge factor, right? So just speaking from personal experience, I remember very clearly, right? Right before I checked into the rehab for the first time, I think maybe for the 6 months leading up to it, I'd go to bed every night being like, I need help. I just want to talk to someone about this. I wish I had someone to talk to about this, right? And I would stand in front of my parents and all my friends for that matter. And in the back of my head, it would just be like, just tell them, right? But it would be so hard to get to that point where I talked about it. And eventually I'd just shut down and not have that conversation, right? And eventually it was a conversation starting from my mother's side, where she didn't bring up an accusation being like, I know you're doing drugs. Why are you doing drugs? It was, I can see something is bothering you, right? I can see that you're not doing well physically. I can see that you're not doing well emotionally. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Right? It was the moment she held that space for me. My walls came down instantly, right? And I just broke
Right.
down crying. And I was like, I'm scared I'm going to die. Right? I was like, I do not want this. I don't know what's happening. And that was the launching point for the first time I tried to get help. It was such a big moment in my life and in my sort of sobriety journey.
Recovery, really. I know you from my sessions that you are somebody who feels very deeply, and in the conventional therapy side of it, you are quite sensitive in terms of very aware of your environment and people's feelings. And I think one of the aspect was that you had that confusion and all the things going on in your head with the environment you were in, which also had to do with the country you're in and the schools and the pressures of performance and what it means, especially if you have learning disabilities, because India really doesn't, especially whatever, 15 years ago or so, cater for things like that. And even now, it's so competitive as a country. We're all very aware of that. I think there was a lot of aspect of not trying to upset your parents and what it means to see them upset if you said too much or you didn't say it in the right way. And I think you also had that quite heaviness in you, which made it difficult, which I think is important.
I think because in a lot of ways there's a roadmap that's drawn out for you, right? I when you grow up in India, you well, it's almost predetermined what career path you're going to take and the type of person you're going to be in, and you're supposed to be respectful and you're supposed to be all these different things. And in a lot of ways, you're also, because it's so competitive and because it's so cutthroat, that emotional side of you is almost asked to be locked up, right?
Yeah.
But because you can't dwell on disappointment because life, it comes at you so fast here that you don't have time to be disappointed or to deal with those feelings of disappointment and rejection and sadness and all these things. especially as a man, especially as a young adolescent, right? Because the moment in India, it's the moment you finish your 10th grade, people are already talking about your 12th grade exams and your entrance exams. So you're already busy preparing for that. And then you have the entrance tests, and then once the entrance tests are done, then you have to deal with, oh, my friends got into XYZ, but I didn't get here. And then once you get in there, then it's all about, I need to have 95% attendance records, and I have to do all this work while preparing for. So it's such a complex journey that young people go through today.
And I think that that aspect of education and what I call conditioning, which is very much in the UK and on other parts of the world, you've got the 11 plus exams, and then depending on the school you get into, you're preparing for your GCSEs, you're preparing for your A levels, you're preparing for and the thing is, if you don't get into the university, then it basically it almost feels like the university you get into determines the rest of your life. Yeah, it's a lot of pressure on kids. And
Because it's also your social standing, right? Because the London School of Economics versus a polytechnic college is, but it's only, I think, when you come into the 30s and you come into the workforce, you realize none of it matters. Right? But when you're in lessons, that is your entire world. You're at that competition, that acceptance of failure is it just defines who you are and who you think you will become. And and I think that that's where parents should play a pivotal role in making you realize that it's just an exam, right? It's just a failure. Like it's going to be like first of a million failures you're going to have in life, or the first of a million successes you're going to have in life. And okay.
we've talked about in our sessions about the soul journey, but one of the things for parents where to really look at it is you're teamed up. So when you're in a family of four, which is there are four very distinct souls in a room, and each soul has such a distinct journey that when, especially for children, and they come into the teens where they're really coming into their own, it's the soul trying to find its purpose. But then what happens is all of a sudden the soul realizes, oh, we're in a family with certain beliefs and behavior. And then we have cultural beliefs and behavior. So I'm a bit restricted in where I can really discover and look at my soul and what I really enjoy and what it needs to do. And then you have the educational system being you box you into it and the societal pressures. So the soul is struggling. And I think for parents to understand that is that you have a very different individual soul in the space. So you need to zoom out because your job really is to hold the soul to see what it needs. And we completely miss that.
And I think a way someone had spoken about this, I forget who it was, but they said essentially that the parents' job is to be the wind beneath their children's wings, right? Yeah, and I think it's absolutely correct what you're saying, right? Where I think parents need to realize that people are there. Everyone is unique and special in their own way, right? And the more I think in sort of and in passing, we'd always be like, "Oh, this kid is so weird." We throw around words like that, which sort of isolate and we isolate and put people down. But I feel like it's the opposite. It is everyone has something unique within them that makes them unique, and as a parent, I think you have to feed that uniqueness, right? Because the more you sort of nurture, right, and the stronger the roots of that person, right? And the stronger the roots, the more grounded and the more confident they will be in themselves, and the more they'll tend to flourish, right? And the easier it then becomes to find your place in a ever complex world.
Changing. And yes, absolutely. And it's sort of if you take away that joy, it almost feels that that joy or what they're passionate about, it the soul really struggles and it just can't flourish or accelerate or expand. And that's what you want every individual, your child to do, is really be in their expansion of creativity and what they want to do. So yes, there are certain things you have to do. You have to learn to read and write and set exams, but you can't shut what that they're passionate about and what they really want to look into. There needs to be space for that, for the other thing to
Exactly.
happen, right?
Exactly. And I think we live in a world where there's so many tools at your disposal that
Absolutely.
there is time for everything. Right. I feel like a lot of times as a parent, you might feel like, oh, but when I was young, you could either do this or that. But
Yes, yeah.
we live in a very different time today. Right? I think when and with just this computer technology being what it is, kids have the ability to do this and that. Right. And so it makes your job in a way that much easier, but also that much more difficult. But it's something that you have to do. You have to let them flourish, and you have to be the catalyst for them to achieve great things.
Absolutely. I think that is, and it's so important that you're talking about this because it's really looking from the child's perspective. And there is not a parent that doesn't struggle with and teens anxiety and prescribed medication for anxiety and depression is ridiculously high in the UK.
It's just as bad here. Yeah,
And it really is quite helpful hearing it from the child who's been through it. So we've talked about the stages of anxiety, early of anxiety and depression, and you've touched a bit on the addiction, but I wanted you to talk a bit more as an adult struggling with addiction and what really parents and the community at large, so it becomes friends and family who sometimes don't know what to say or how to be there for you because they almost feel they're out of their depth or they don't want to trigger you in any way. So what tends to happen is there tends to be more of silence around you where there is an avoidance and then that is taken by yourself from your experience of this and interpreted in a way that is
think
even
so.
more self-damaging.
I think so, right? I would make the case that I think addiction, let's be honest, it is a disease. It has a large genetic component. All these things are absolutely true. But I think a large component to addiction is loneliness, right? It is escapism taken to an extreme degree. So,
Yes.
you think a lot of people when they see someone where you can tell this person is dealing with a crippling addiction or is headed in the wrong direction, people either let go, saying that, oh my God, it's not my problem, or they get a little too involved and tend to push the person away. And I think it's what is really important for parents and well-wishers to realize is that a lot of times it's a cry for help, right? It is a lack of community and a lack of safe spaces that drives a lot of behavior of addicts, right? So I think in a lot of cases, what you should do or what is just needed is just is the acknowledgement that I know you're dealing with something and reassurance that, listen, I am here for you when you need me, right? I am here if you need to talk. And it's about creating ecosystems where people do check-ins, right? Where you just check in with the person to see how they're doing. And it's these small things that have exponential sort of reverberations through the system, right, of an addict, where all it takes sometimes is if a call from someone to just tell you that they love you, right? It is that simple reassurance, right? So as a parent, again, it's about letting go, but not completely leaving the person to themselves, but it's about peppering in a lot of love and affection and reminders that you're not in this alone.
Yes.
Because I think addiction isn't a solo journey. It's something because addiction affects everyone, right? Addiction affects everything that it touches, whether it's relationships, whether it's money, it's everything. So you're in it just as much as the person who is addicted, right? Because a lot of times, while I might be the reason for someone's trauma, but their addiction is also a cause of my trauma, right? And so I need to first deal with what those effects are, and and I need to be able to get on top of that before I can go and help someone else. So
And one of the things that I think we've talked about this that really spirals for you is when you feel the shame
yeah,
because you're making somebody else's speech or reaction make you feel of something that you're already struggling with, which is
yeah,
your
absolutely.
worthlessness or the shame. And I think this is very particular with friends who support that needs to not come into the space. And silence can sometimes be interpreted in that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then and
Shame. I think shame is the fire that really is a propellant, right? Like it can take something small and it just absolutely blows it up, right? And I think once shame takes hold, then with shame comes lies and deception and manipulation. And I think what's important to know is that it's not all these things don't always come from a bad place, right? So as an addict, a lot of times I would lie and deceive because in my head it would always be like, I don't want this to be your problem. This is a me problem. I am trying to protect you from whatever I'm dealing with right now.
right.
Right. And so I think it's difficult to not personalize that. Right.
Yes.
As a parent, you might be like, oh, but my child has been lying to me for years. Yes, but it's he didn't like they did. Sometimes they might have done it with what they thought was the best intention, where
Yeah.
they're trying to protect you from something, right? So it's so shame. It's such a weird thing. So it's very important that you don't personalize the shame or you don't
Yes.
internalize the shame,
Yeah.
and you realize that and you accept that this is a very strange situation that you're in. It's not normal,
Yeah.
but just because it's strange and it's not normal, that doesn't mean that I can't still find kindness and compassion to to help bring someone out of it.
Yes. And I think this is where I think parents don't realize the importance of maturation work because the exhaustion for the parent is, oh my gosh, he's lying again or she's lying again,
Exactly.
and I can't deal with it. And that's what you're
Yeah.
talking about, making it mean something about them. This is not
Yeah.
about them. You see, if you can be in a space with your child and no matter what they say, your whatever it is doesn't get bumped into, right? Your
Exactly.
judgment
Yeah.
or blame on yourself or the judgment on yourself doesn't get blamed into. You can be present and talk about it
Mhm.
every single time, no
Yes.
matter what the child is saying. But the
Absolutely.
parent has to be extremely present and so grounded, it
Grounded.
yeah, in a way that you're not gonna make it mean anything about yourself. What your child is saying is you have to hear and listen without making it mean about you or your parenting. But parents
Exactly.
cannot do that unless they've done some maturation work themselves. I
Exactly.
People don't realize that that is available. People
Exactly.
think, "Yeah, I'm
Exactly.
gonna go to therapy, and I've done conventional therapy, and this is where I am. So I've done everything I need to do to be
Right.
resolve it, and my child is going to therapy." But no, there is so much more out there. So if something is not working for you, you need to try other modalities because what it is the goal is to help your child have the best
To
life.
help out. Exactly.
You know.
And you think going back to what you said about being a good parent, two things can be true at the same time. You could have been the best parent in the world according to the means and the tools you had at your disposal. But
Yes.
from the point of view of your child, you could have been the worst parent because they didn't get the kind of love and care that they thought they deserved, right? And both of these things can be true, right? So, like you said, so you have to be ever present and you have to have done the kind of inner work required. When someone is standing there and yelling at you, being like, you're a horrible person, I can to acknowledge that what they're saying is true from their point of view, but also tell yourself that I know I did the best that I could with what I
Yes.
had. and not react to what is it's about responding and not reacting, like, because
Absolutely. And it's the trigger because the
exactly.
child was already, when you're in addiction, you're very triggered. Everything is so much more, it almost feels so personal and so sensitive that the parent gets triggered. So the conversation doesn't go anywhere because you've got
It
two
doesn't go
people
in
triggered.
completely, right? Yeah.
So, and that's the importance of the parent being in the space without being triggered. That work is, it's sort of actually, it's when it's starting off, it's actually more important because the early stages, your parent can actually stop and navigate out just from the anxiety and the depression when they see it in the space and doesn't accelerate to it being any more. But as the child goes through addiction, it is as important for the parents to do the unlearning of their own
Exactly.
childhood
Exactly.
while their child they is doing the unlearning themselves. I,
Exactly.
and
And I think through that unlearning and those conversations, you're having very raw and honest conversations, right? And those are the kind of conversations that if you can work through, they will bring you together, right? And as a parent, you then become an anchor in the child's life, right? You become something that the child can more easily come back to
yes.
and be honest with,
Yeah.
right? So when it comes to like journey of recovery, become that anchor point. And of course, it's not easy to, which is why I think it's so important that you do the work.
Yeah.
You keep, and this is a work that takes time,
Yes.
and it takes patience, and it takes a lot of vulnerability, right? It's you need to be able to put yourself in places.
Yes. And it's sort of you have to do the work anyway. So if you're not going to do the work at the beginning of the journey, where you're looking at the child as an individual soul,
Mm.
you have to do it during the addiction or after the addiction, God forbid it gets for anybody that bad. But it's going back to the same thing that if you're not going to do it and acknowledge it, then you're going to have to do it anyway. Because you have to
Exactly.
be and listen and see where that soul is feeling so much trauma that it's actually using external substances to numb the fact that they have to get out of bed and have a life and lead a life that they're not really happy about. So, as a parent, you have to look at it as a soul journey for the child, and then you have to deal with it anyway. So why go through doing all that and not really look and be curious about how you're showing up? So it needs to be
Exactly.
done. So I wanted to talk about the your unlearning through my holding, which is very much the body mind maturation process. And so I wanted you to talk about a bit of the uncomfortable work that you did, which
Yeah.
the shadow work and the trauma holding and also sort of the masculine and the feminine balance and what you described so well as these different masks that you've had to put on, and it was sort of a, I think you described it, which is very much in our holding about taking those masks off.
So I think in the beginning, when I first came to you, this was after having been in therapy rooms and Alcoholics Anonymous rooms and Narcotics Anonymous rooms for a good part of 15 years, right? So I entered the sessions with, so I wouldn't say coming from a place where I'd given up, but I had humbled myself to the point that I had said that I do not have the answers, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so coming into the process, having put my walls all the way down,
Yes.
and having accepted that I've not been completely honest every time I have tried to do this,
Mhm.
right? And B, or I have always told the person in front of me what I think they want to hear, right? It's and
You
one
couldn't, I just want to, you couldn't get away with that with me.
right. So it's coming in with the humility that listen, I don't have all the answers. And then also it's knowing that it's going to get uncomfortable, and then sort of the entire process being getting comfortable with the discomfort of
Yes.
knowing, right? Because I think right from our first session, we went to some very uncomfortable places. We went to memories which I thought I had either sat on or forgotten or essentially forced myself to forget, right?
Yes.
Because again, going back to what you had said, I am someone who is absolutely very emotional. I cry once on a good day, multiple times on a bad day, right? And for the longest time, I was so uncomfortable with that as a person because I was always taught that as a man, I'm supposed to be strong, supposed to be all these things. But w- through the sessions that we did, came to a point where I realized that what was holding me back was that every mask that I had on was put on because I was told I had to be a version of myself,
Mm.
which was so far removed from who I am as an individual. And so with each session, that we always went to parts of my childhood where I was being forced to be taken from myself. And I think while it was very uncomfortable, you did it in such a way that it never made me feel less than, or it never made me feel like an outcast, or it never made me feel one way or another, right? It was always like, it is what it is, right?
So
Let's
my
deal
yeah.
with it.
So what I realized with you earlier on is that beautiful heart of yours and how you couldn't see it. And it really was trying to get you to accept it and see it and not be ashamed of that beautiful because you felt so deeply about everything. And in our sessions, it was very apparent of how beautiful it was, the way you talked about animals, the way you talked about dogs and your work with dogs. And it almost felt like you couldn't express or be with it. You had to be somebody else. And that disconnection with yourself had gone so far away that you'd lost who you were because society and people weren't regarding it as important. So the connection with yourself is what we really worked on with you to bring you back to your heart and and really be so comfortable with your uniqueness. And it was seeing that uniqueness in you and trying for you to see and accept that uniqueness so you could just be comfortable and grow that. And I think that was
I think so. And I think also, I when we were doing our sessions, I think I had just started dating my now wife, right? And so I was also sort of trying to navigate that side of it, where every time we would have a session and I would unlock something new, there was also that fear of, oh, will my partner now accept that this is a more real version of me? And that was a really sort of difficult piece to work through for me, right? Because this was someone I was just like, oh, I really enjoy spending time with. Will they be okay with the changes that I am going through, so or the metamorphosis that I'm going through?
and I think you could get to a point of vulnerability in our conversations quite easily than other people that come into the space. And this is not just
So I don't think it wasn't
yeah.
easy. It was, again, it was coming into the sessions with, going back to, I think another easier way to do this was step one and step two of Alcoholics Anonymous is by essentially you saying that, hey, listen, I don't have the solutions. I'm surrendering myself to the process. And so to get to vulnerability easily, you have to completely surrender. You, in a way, you have to give up, right? Give up is maybe not the right way of saying it, but it is surrender.
To be so open because you will have tried everything. I just don't know where to go. So now I'm open to it. Right.
So now I'm going to completely open myself up to the process. And you have to let the process take you to where the process has to take you, right? Yes. So it's not a one size fits all. My journey would be very different, say, from the journey. If my brother did the same thing, it would probably be a completely different journey for him, right? Yeah. So surrender, and then I mean, you have a defined outcome in terms of, by the end of my 12 sessions, I want to have a better understanding of who I am. But it can't be like, oh, I want to be the most punctual, the most honest, the most compassionate, the kindest person in the world, because that's very unrealistic, right? In a way, because
Yeah.
that comes after. All those things come after. It's just the journey, and then the rewards come years and years after you've gone through the journey, I think. And
I do think one of the things that really worked with you is the way conventional therapy and this modality differs is who I am being is a vibration and energy. So these professions talk about no judgment and no blame in the space, and that's absolutely right. There is no judgment. But how you feel about me, who I am being in a no judgment and no blame, gave you the safety to drop to places that you hadn't really gone before. And that's the safety of it. You can only drop into your dark shadow work if you feel safe enough and the vulnerability where there is no judgment and space, but also then for parents to also realize that it becomes the same thing and how
yeah,
important it is for anybody, especially your
yeah.
child, to speak from a place of vulnerability. There has to
Oh,
be no
absolutely.
judgment and blame.
There has to be a sense of safety, right? Like I remember in I think it was my first rehab program, so this is about 10 years back. One of the most important things I had learned in that program was let your comfort level dictate your honesty, right? And I think through our sessions, I think this was maybe not from the first one, but I remember we had done a pre-session, right, where we were talking about our hopes and expectations, and you were doing when we were doing that work. I think that's when I realized that this is someone I can be absolutely comfortable and transparent with, because I think we had in the first conversation there was there was a certain chemistry, right? I think we may not have been saying the same things, but we were in a sense speaking the same language, right? We were
Yeah,
both kind of understood.
that's a good point. It's a good point because I do tell parents what happens is when parents deal with, I've had parents whose kids are self harming. They absolutely don't know what to do. So they're following instructions from either their doctor, their GP, or mental health professionals. And so their knowledge is really like, I don't know what's going on. So I'm going to listen to professional advice, which is
Mm.
absolutely right. But one of the things that I tell parents is that if your child is not progressing with that practitioner, you have to change. You have to see who is working for them because it doesn't fit all. So, although
It's
you're
not.
recommended through
Yeah.
that process of mental
Yeah.
health, if you can see that the child is still self harming after 8 months, after a year, and it's getting worse, it's trying to see what do they need because it's
Absolutely.
not being resolved.
Yeah.
And it's so
I think so.
important
Yeah.
to keep on changing that
Yeah.
they
Keep on changing, figuring out what works for you, and also understand that while a lot of it is mental work, but there is a huge spiritual component to it, right?
yeah.
There is a need for spiritual growth, and when I say spiritual growth, it's not along religious lines, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It is along the lines of I am a member of the human race, right?
Yeah.
And there is a certain energy that connects us all.
Absolutely.
And you can name it. If you're a scientific person, you might give it a scientific definition. If you're a religious person, it will have a religious connotation to you. But a lot of the work is spiritual. It is understanding that you, you are a part of the collective, and you are an important part of the collective, and you have to be able to accept that fact and then sort of grow within that space. And I think that's a large component.
I think this work for me becomes effective is because my work is on the spiritual and it is on the collective consciousness. So for me, I do see everybody is here for their purpose and the uniqueness. We cannot duplicate what somebody brings into it, and we cannot do without that person. So we need to hold everybody in the planet. We can't let anybody leave until it's their time to leave. And I think that is so important. I think you're right, because it's actually seeing that uniqueness. Because for somebody to come back home to their heart, they have to see it themselves. And unless the practitioner cannot see that,
You can't get there, right?
you
But,
can't.
because conventional theory will tell you that, or as someone who's on his journey of sobriety, it's about creating sort of communities and creating safe spaces. And the thing is, you can't get to that point till you accept that spiritual part, that I am part of the greater collective, right? It's only once I unlock that side and I start to believe and understand why I need connection with people, right? Why I need to have good friendships, and why I need to have honest friendships. You can't get to that part of it until you start doing the work, right?
No, absolutely. So one of the things I think we talked about, and I wanted for you really to give what has worked for you in terms of practical precautions that you found useful while you were going through that process of addiction and after relapse and coming back. And so maybe about AA meetings or mentoring or carrying your practical things like not carrying cash for temptations, not going gigs, things like that that you
Absolutely, absolutely. So now I'm coming up to about 2 years of being clean and sober, and in my 35 years, this is the longest that I have stayed sober, right? And when I talk about sobriety, I'm not just talking about the drugs and alcohol. I am talking about cigarettes and pornography and everything, right? Where all the things that, like gambling,
emotionally engaged.
exactly. So I think for the longest time in my life, I was always like, oh, I can always outsmart my addiction, and I can do the things that I love, and I can do the partying, and I can do this, that, and the other, and I will be fine. It's only now, after having done all the work, and I realized that you a large part of beating addiction is again surrendering to the fact that I cannot beat my addiction. Right? My addict will always be a huge part of me, but it's now gotten to a point where at first it was always about caging up the addict, but it's now become about acknowledging the addict side of me, and realizing what does not work for me. So a lot of that includes absolutely doing a 180 in terms of doing things that ensure that you stay safe and secure, all while being the best version of yourself, right? So I used to love listening to music. So being in clubs and being around the drugs and alcohol, it was always like, this is something I will never give up. But now I have happily given it up, because the old me thought that this is the only thing that brings me happiness. But through the work that we did, something that you started telling me right from our first meeting, I believe, was do things that bring you joy, right? And you were very clear about there being a distinction between happiness and joy. Joy is a more pure version of it. It's very action driven, right? So I've been able to cut out and stay away from paths that I know will lead me back down to addiction, and being able to find joy and in the smaller, more real things in life, right? Whether it's something as simple as going and sitting next to a football field and watching children play football for half an hour, that brings me joy, right? So now I know I would rather on a Friday night go and watch a game of football, or watch football on TV, or I will go and feed the street dogs. And there's so much that I do now, which is so far removed from what I did back then. And it's been absolutely life changing and life altering. And it's become, and I'm doing it not from, oh my God, I can't believe I have to do this, but it comes from a place of joy, as we said it. And it becomes a lot easier to do all these things.
Because you're more connected with who you are. That's our journey.
And I think that's what you realize as the longer this goes on. It's about creating environments that will help you thrive and be the version of you that you actually want to be. right? And it becomes even more satisfying because I don't know if this happens to a lot of addicts, but for me, what would happen is I would every night I would get really high and I'd be locked up in this room, not talking to anyone. But I would have these scenarios playing in my head where I would picture the best version of me and be like, oh, I was the best version of me. This is what I would be doing. But at the same time, in the real world, I would just be getting high, or I would just be getting drunk, or I would just be doing all these things, which would further isolate me from that self-actualized version of myself that I was. Right. And so now the longer I have stayed sober and the longer that I have practiced the things that we learned in our sessions, the closer to that version I am becoming. And again, that version keeps changing. So I'll never be that version, but it's all about the progress that you make. And it's very satisfying. And while you'll always miss the crazy days, but when you wake up to a life that has all the elements that you've always wanted, right? Whether it's a relationship, like a fulfilling relationship. It's for me, it's my relationship with my wife and my cat and my parents and me having reconnected with my friends. It's absolute. It's so easy to shut that voice down that says, "I what if we could just have one last?" Now it's
Yeah. All right, good. And I think what I wanted to talk, I want you to tell me what your aspirations are for yourself and really talk about what you want to do and sort of in terms of
absolutely.
your time in the next few years, because I know from your feeds and things on your communication on out things outside the session about how you're involved in a lot of charitable and voluntary work, especially dealing with animals. And I know there is a Fund Me page that you support. I just want you to talk about your
Yes,
aspirations.
absolutely. So I think when I look back, the start of my journey towards recovery started when I started working with animals, right? When I started doing work that wasn't centered around my happiness. It was centered around wellness and bringing joy to other living things. So I
Mm.
think that was the real starting point. So it's been a large part of what I want to do and what I aspire towards. So at the moment, I run a home kitchen and a home bakery with my partner and my wife. We make weird and random and beautiful food, and it is all encompassing and it is all time consuming and it is amazing. And we are both crazy about animals. So the goal over the next couple of years is to take that home kitchen and make it and transform it into a cafe, which will be a community space for music and books and literature and poets and art of all kinds. At the same time, it will also double up as a makeshift foster home for street animals in Bombay. So dogs and cats primarily. And we use the space to obviously shelter them from the elements, but at the same time, train them, get them vaccinated, get them spayed, get them neutered, and get them to a place where they can be adopted and they can find their loving forever homes.
It's
And
amazing. I think it's so needed. But
I, I think so, right? Because I personally I can get into it, but I think there's a huge problem when it comes to and the non-profit networks when it comes to animal care in India. And I think it's a problem that we are looking to solve and without commercializing it, but using sort of more capitalism modalities of the cafe to create safe spaces for create safe spaces and funding for animal care and sort of rehabilitation work. And I think all my energy and all sort of the passion is moving towards and is sort of focused on that at the
that sounds
yeah.
amazing. That's
Agree.
really
It's awesome and having being in the throes of addiction for almost 2 decades. I never thought that I would ever be in this position. So it's something that I feel like I've finally found my calling and something that I was put on this earth to do. So it's something that it's not something that I take lightly. It's not something that I take for granted. It is.
I can see that because I know you're a foodie. So, and I know you're a trained in certain as in gelato making and things like that, and
Yes.
you have done that quite successfully. So it's quite interesting how much of it that your aliveness in you when you talk about it. Joy is that active aliveness about life and how actually things are sort of aligning with you,
Yeah,
and it's
absolutely.
you've combined your two passions, it looks like, your love for animals and your need to help them, and also your passion for food and creating something new on that front in terms of recipes and baking and merging. So that's
Yeah,
wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that. Keep you posted on development.
definitely. Yes,
And
I definitely will.
so I wanted to really thank you because you really there was so many sort of gold points in there, and it is extremely it's a different perspective for the parents and the general public and even addicts to hear it from somebody who's been through the journey. Other It's very different when I speak to parents. It's actually hearing it from a child, somebody else's child, and everybody connects with somebody else's child if they're a parent. So I just wanted to thank you for being so honest and being so open and taking the time out to help other people who might find this extremely useful, both adults who are going through addiction, children, and also parents. So
Absolutely. It's been an honor. Thank you so much. Thank you for
thank
asking me to
you
be a
so
part
much.
of
Oh,
this.
no, thank you so much. All right, take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.